It's always good. Mercury is still in detriment, my friends. Just because the retrograde has ended, we do have only until the end of this week to deal with Mercury in retrograde, though. So if you're joining
This
us,
is a Mercury in retrograde.
oh, dang it. To deal with Mercury in detriment, which is just as bad, sometimes worse in my case. Dang. Anyway, recap. Mercury is in detriment until this weekend when Mercury finally goes back into Capricorn and gets their stuff together, which will be really nice. Hi, I'm KristaLyn Sophia. This is Vivi Henriette, and we are Ask Me Astros. We do this every month where we will actually take today for about an hour. We're going to jump in with an anonymous astrology chart. And I just remembered before I share it, I want to make sure I make it a little bit more anonymous on my program, but an anonymous astrology chart where this person has asked us a question and we have gone in the way we would for a consultation with someone and really analyzed the astrology of that question while also applying some common sense and counseling skills, which I think are really important to incorporate into an astrological practice. And both of us have training and a lot of emphasis in those areas of life as well. It's a big interest for both of us. So, hi, Vivi. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm just gonna pop in to say not only is Mercury in detriment, but it is heading towards a square with Neptune. Thus, details feel like they've been dissolving at every turn.
Yeah.
I am now in Los Angeles, which means I am 3 hours earlier than you. So if I feel like I'm just waking up, because
we're not running on the same schedule anymore. It's sad.
Waking up. Oh boy. Yeah, I'm excited to be back at it with you. And last month, there were some sound issues on my end. So hopefully we have okay audio. And yeah, I'm excited to jump into this chart.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's been a battle of the microphones for me over here too. Like my regular microphone is pretty good. The one I use for my phone for like live broadcasts and stuff, consistently, this is the second time a Mercury retrograde has proven to me that my microphone's not good enough. So I'm still looking for the chosen microphone for a phone, for a cell phone presentation. But anyway, do we want to cover? I know normally we talk about a couple of the contemporary things that are going on, some themes in general that are probably going to pop up in this chart. I can think of a few. Do you have any off the top of your head that you're interested in covering today?
Do you want to pop up the chart at the moment? We can go through it.
Sure. Yes. I can do that. Let's bring it up to transits, and hopefully this lets me. I did not test this in a very Mercury in detriment way. Don't show me the tip again. Just let me do what I want to do. I want to share Luna. Ta-da! Luna. Is it up? No, it's not.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. That's just,
okay, you can see it. Okay, cool. Great. So this is transits for today. Let's just do Washington, D.C. Don't anybody go back and rewatch the previous minutes so you know that general area where I live. Anyway, Washington, D.C., for giggles, and because Washington, D.C. is our capital and very well will represent the nation that we are talking about, even though that's really not that important for this chart. It's a good rule of thumb to follow.
Yeah. Let's see.
We are looking at some interesting transits right now with, like you said, the let's see, we were talking about Mercury square Neptune, which if I just click Mercury here, we actually get to see that and how that's going to perfect, I believe, later today, actually, isn't it? So I'm pulling up a little transit thing so I know a more quick way of finding these things. But yeah, so we have Mercury square Neptune today, which is going to be really interesting. I know later this week, another one that I'm thinking about a lot is going to be the Mars trine Jupiter, which you can see coming in. That's going to happen perfect the day after the new moon coming up in Capricorn. And so I've been really thinking about those two and what they're going to do now that Mars is exalted and really showing it. So what thoughts do you have, Vivi?
I'm just really excited. excited for Mercury to move into Capricorn. I never thought nothing. I think it's I know I'm just going to keep reiterating this. I want to point out I actually think like Mercury and Sagittarius, like as a natal placement, is super fun. Like I know a lot of really like talkative and like intellectually robust and like really prolific people with Mercury and Sag. So I don't want to keep being like, ugh, Mercury and Sag, Mercury and Sag. I think it's just this like square to Neptune that's bringing up a lot of like anxiety for some people and like confusion that I would just rather do without.
Yeah.
And so I'm like excited about that to move forward. And I'm also feel that this like Jupiter Mars trine situation is going to be really like nice and like grounding and add like some stability. And then thinking about we're also having this new moon in Capricorn, which feels, I don't know, it feels grounding after all of this sort of big shakeup energy.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like Mercury in Sagittarius is sort of the variety bag of candy, where it's like you can have literally all of them, but if you want that one specific one, you're going to have to go digging for it. And so, once we get into Capricorn, we get the bag that is all the candy we were looking for, or it's all the candy we're given, at least at that time. I'm not going to say Capricorn gives you everything you want or exactly what you want. It gives you probably the dark chocolate sugar-free version of the candy you like, which I personally have learned to love, but I understand how it's not the sugary sweetness that we might expect when Mercury is more, in their element, or even in Sagittarius. You get this sugar high from being in Sagittarius, and then you get into Capricorn and you have the crash from the sugar high, and it's like, oh, right. Now that the energy is gone, what actually is going to stick from all this stuff that I did? So it's kind of,
I feel like Mercury and Sagittarius is like, I don't know, like all the candy you don't, but like the like no fun candy, and you get it like doled out.
right. Mercury in Capricorn is candy corn, just a whole bag of candy corn.
You only get like 3 pieces a day because you have to ration it somehow.
Oh my gosh. So honestly, I have a lot of Capricorn in my chart, and I can attest to this because when I was first trying to get healthier in my eating habits, I gave myself an allotment of 5 dark chocolate Hershey Kisses a day that I could know that I would have as I was getting used to the change. So can confirm for sure. Good call. Yeah.
I've been, yes, and yes. What are you thinking about this new moon? And
So the new moon, and we can actually look at the chart for that really quickly right here. The new moon is interesting to me because look at the party we've got going on. It's like everybody's invited. Well, I say everybody's invited, and really it's just the nodes being, or the lots being there. But we've got Mars nearby. So where this would normally feel like the burrow in the ground and let yourself hibernate for a second, because the moon is in detriment, the sun is gaining in light, but not quite there yet. We have 2 characters on this that are making me think, and that's Mars in Capricorn, who is far enough away not to be considered really in conjunction, but still there and still exalted and still really seeming to indulge in that energy. So we're noticing a very Mars forward kind of thing right now. And so this ability to rest and recuperate is there, but I feel like some of us might be doing rest and recuperation in the form of, let me get this out of the way so that I'm not so stressed out kind of rest and recuperation, like active rest and recuperation of removing stressors. And then the thing that I'm looking at actually is a couple days, I think it's on the 21st, when the sun moves into Aquarius, it's the same day that Pluto does. So they will conjoin each other and move into Aquarius together. And I'm really interested to see what kind of headlines we get around that time. And we're just really getting close with the moon saying, hey, Capricorn, by the way, you've got a lot of energy happening this month. And it's making us kind of pay attention to that Capricorn energy that is really about to uproot and shift.
Yeah, I like this idea of I don't know if you said, I don't know these are your exact words, but it's sort of like active recovery. Like thinking about this month, I was listening to the astrological forecast with the for the astrology podcast, and I think the biggest takeaway was just thinking about the month of January being the sort of like preparation month of like get your shit together, and I feel like that's really signified by this like this new moon in Capricorn, because it feels like having there was been this sort of like Mercury, previous party stirring up the sort of Sagittarius chaos. And now there's a sense of like, get your shit together.
Yep. Yeah.
Before like, also thinking about that, like Sun in Aquarius is a sense of just like, okay, like get your groundings, because we're also going to like, there's going to be this sort of like blast off moment. And like, you're gonna like be sent on this like really wild mission, and you're going to be really happy that you have some stability.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Especially, last year we had Pluto was only in Aquarius from March to May.
Yeah.
And then in, I think, middle of June, Pluto went back into Capricorn. We get a bit of a longer stint of that this year. And then finally, late this year, Pluto actually does come into Aquarius to stay. So like, we're not messing around anymore. It's kind of like the thing. I feel like Pluto has been the librarian in, if you've ever seen the movie Monsters University, one of the things that they have to do in their frat party thing is sneak through a library with a librarian that is also like a very vicious monster if you make any noise whatsoever. And so I feel like Pluto in Capricorn is the librarian and has been like really turning around and like scaring us with what Aquarius is going to be like, and then turning back around, and we've been tiptoeing. But what we're not realizing is you don't just tiptoe forever. Like the turnaround and the like surprise, this is what we're going to be dealing with, is probably more what's going to be staying after this year. I think that's going to be, part of me is excited because I do like to see change and growth and evolution, and those Aquarian themes are there. And then the other part of me is seeing how we're already handling it. And it's like the early period of that is going to be a ride as we get used to it. If the situation to date is an indicator.
It also makes me think of like just kind of building on your metaphor there, that the fear is just almost always worse than the reality.
Yes.
So like by this sort of like thinking about this like Capricorn librarian, right? I'm thinking, cliche, maybe sort of like old and like stuck to their ways, like the sort of like decrepit energy of just like no change, and like, oh, like trying to like fear you of like, there's something there. And like when you actually enter the next thing, the sort of relief that like, oh, actually I can do with this. And like it's in dealing with a thing is always so much easier than anticipating a thing. And so maybe there's what you're speaking of is a little bit of like that relief, if I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think the liberation that we're going to experience between now and 2046, right? Like we've got time to get used to this, but it's a very much like almost a coming of age thing. Like Capricorn represents older age oftentimes, and we're still going into a Saturn sign, but Aquarius is the sort of rebel in a lot of explanations of Aquarius. So it's this, we've been doing the same thing, and now we don't have the same jurisdiction over us. We don't have the same like the chaperone has released us. We've graduated into a little bit more of an independence. And now how far are we going to go until we realize that we can actually manage our own energy and our own stamina?
Yeah. I mentioned this before, but something I think I got this from Spencer Michaud, and I love this analogy of Capricorn and Aquarius, of thinking about Capricorn being like material reality on planet Earth, right? Which makes sense of like, how do we build the things? What are the rules? How do we break them? Like sort of being very embedded in this sort of material physical world. But then like suddenly you get Aquarius, and it's like you get this plane that just takes you up, and now you're looking down at everything. And now you're like, what is this fucked up situation? And how do we make the new vision? And I think like that can be really beautiful, right? And it can also be like a lot of like really kind of devastating of like shit. Like I think about like the sort of environmental crisis, right? And with Aquarius being just like, what the fuck have we done? How are we gonna like fix this world. Also, a little bit of, there is this sort of dystopian within Aquarius too, of like, what is this weird new vision? Are we going to Mars? And
Are we burying people on the moon now?
Yeah.
Which was a headline last week. But also, it reminds me of this sort of, in Capricorn, we were so detail oriented,
Yeah.
right? We were so fixated on the tree that we forgot about the forest. And it does remind me of this one story we learned when I was working at Disney World about when they were first designing the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
And they had this newer Imagineer working on the color for the roof, the paint color.
Okay.
And he was so excited because he got the color perfect. And so he went up there and he painted the roof. And eventually one of the more seasoned Imagineers came down and said, "Hey, come off the roof for a second. I want to show you something." And when he zoomed out, they realized that the color that he had done, because of the way the rest of the house was, looked like a hot pink roof on a haunted mansion. And so it was because he was so detail oriented that he got that one thing really well, but it did not fit with the bigger picture, with the zooming out that Aquarius can sometimes give us, that whole zooming out of like what worked and what really shouldn't be hot pink.
Although also a hot roof on a haunted house, I'm here for it.
That's the one I'd haunt. Yeah.
Ooh,
Barbie's haunted mansion.
Okay, I know, because we have to move on to the chart, but also
Yeah.
Can we pause a moment? Can we just dive into this headline? People being buried on the moon. Do you want to like extrapolate?
Yeah. So I have not done deep research into this, but I do know last week the current presidential administration did consult one of our First Nations communities because the moon is sacred to them. And so they consulted this community and said, "Hey, we're going to be," for some reason, I don't know why, I literally should have read the article, just didn't get around to it, but they're going to be putting bodies on the moon. And I'm not really sure why. And maybe it's because they're planning on they're planning on building stations there. I know we have a lot of lunar voyages planned for 2024. There's going to be, I think, at least 4 people going up to the moon. And so they're probably just forward planning and saying, "Hey, if people end up buried on the moon, how do you feel about that?" But it was a conversation that happened last week.
Do you just like do this? Just like,
yeah.
For those who are just maybe listening in the future, just like palms to like head, just whatever this thing is. Like, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sit and think about my opinions on things a lot. And on this one, I'm giving myself more time to figure this out because there's a lot to think about and to process. And 20 years from now, something about this is going to feel normal to people. And that's also mind-blowing to me. It's just how many things feel cutting edge now that are going to be almost outdated in 20 years or by the time Pluto gets into Pisces.
Also, I just want to point this out just because we're here.
Mm-hmm.
Just thought of it, right? Like sometimes just because something feels like outdated or normal, maybe we should take it for granted. Like it doesn't necessarily, I'm gonna keep switching my screen and we go over.
I was just pulling up the
thank you.
chart.
Doesn't mean it's necessarily like it, like just because things feel normal doesn't necessarily think they're good. Like I keep thinking, when you say that, what first comes to mind is the fact that at some point someone thought this idea of like taking everyone's trash and just burying it in mounds was like a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, and the fact that that's like our status quo, that we just have like just islands that are just like trash islands because that's just how we dispose of things.
Yeah.
And thinking, and then being like, oh no, it's just like how we do things. And now we're just kind of like, no, now we're gonna like do that on the moon. So is it like, I don't know, like 40 years we're going to have just like the moon is just gonna be essentially like a trash dump for bodies, and then like we are now cultivating space for our just like big junkyard, which is so fucked up.
It's funny that you chose that example because literally my great grandfather could have stopped this, but there was a mountain made out of what remains after you burn coal. So it's called culm. Mm-hmm. You've seen it. And oh no, you've never been to where I came from. Anyway, back in my the place I was born town, there's a culm bank, but it is actually the second largest man-made mountain in the world because they were mining and they just kept piling on top of this hill and it became a mountain. And they would put their garbage there. Turns out what's left after you burn coal is still flammable. So it is on fire, and it has been on fire for about 80 years. And every summer you can watch the smoke coming out of the mountain, or you could before it got so deep that you can't see the smoke anymore, but it is still on fire and will eventually get into the coal mines underneath the city, and it will become a second Centralia, which is also 45 minutes from where I grew up. So the whole idea of garbage being lit and then causing chaos is something that I've gotten used to just because I've watched a mountain burn my entire life.
And you have to like that's just the pollution must be insane, right? Like I come from Detroit. There's like this incinerator, and like just like the cancer rates are just crazy. Like
there's been an effort to clean the sulfur out of our creek for decades.
Okay, Lord, this is a whole podcast. But
that's Capricorn, right? Maybe moving into Aquarius, back on topic. And we do have the person who asked the question this month did ask, is Pluto going to keep basically coming at me? And when we pull up the chart, I did notice like this person did just finish their Pluto square recently. So I can see why they're side-eyeing Pluto a little bit. I will go ahead and put the screen up.
Also, we should say too, like Pluto is a very slow moving planet. And I know, just spoiler alert, I know this person pretty well whose chart we're looking at. And I know they also had like, I don't know, like an astrologer tell them that essentially like, oh, you're just going to like, you know, like this Pluto transit, something you just live with. And I think that like when looking at transits to the chart, you're going to see Pluto kind of stick around, and I wouldn't like have panic attacks and judge your life, right? Like,
yeah, especially since Pluto is not going to get past the 1 degree of Aquarius this year. So, you know, when we think about, oh no, I have like my something is at 11 degrees Aquarius, that's going to be years before Pluto even touches it. So I've been really emphasizing that with a lot of clients who are coming up because Pluto is changing and they're like, I'm an Aquarius rising. What do I do? And it's like, well, where's your ascendant? Where are your important points in your chart? And, you know, at what point do we have to think about what Pluto might do with that?
And even if when it is doing things, right, like realizing that like a Pluto transit is going to be it's going to be a bigger story. It's not going to be just like, you know, like your house is on fire for a year or whatever it is while Pluto's with an orb. Does that make sense? Right? Like, so.
Yeah. I really like one of the themes for Pluto in Tarnis's Cosmo and Psyche is evolution. And evolution isn't a mutation, right? It's evolution. It's a process. And so what is Pluto going to evolve in that area of your life that is going to take time? Like, for instance, with Uranus, I've been living the Uranus on my son's story for the past 2 years. Yeah. And that's more revolution, but it's shown up. But I've like the comfort that you have is knowing you have time to adjust, is knowing you have time to figure it out, and that whatever's coming up, it will come up slowly. And maybe it'll be something that really throws you, but it will come up slowly.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Should we pull the chart?
Yeah, the chart is ready. We just have to add it to the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's me.
Your power. Oops. Speaking of Pluto.
Speaking of my power. Okay. Mirror. Got this. Mirror in this camera. Okay, and then we're gonna add to stage.
Cool. There we go.
Yay. And
shall we talk about some of the questions that this person asked specifically, and then we can dive in?
Sure, let's do it. Do you want to read them?
Yeah. So this person had 2 or so questions, kind of. So we'll read those and then we'll handle them one by one. So this person asked, what should I do about making money and being creative right now? Which I thought was a really great question. Yeah. And then they asked, is this a good time for me to start a new relationship? And then also, is Pluto still creating havoc in my life? I think Pluto is probably the quickest one to sort of resolve in this. And again, if we look at this and I bring up transits with it, so this will bring up transits for today, and we look at Pluto. Pluto's at 29 now. Their Pluto is at 25. So again, it was probably year before last, or even before that the Pluto transit began, or perfected at least. And it's been separating ever since. It's now 4 degrees off and about to get far enough away that I think we can say we're done. with this one, because I like to give that 3-degree orb. That's my personal preference.
Yeah.
So for this, I think that they probably are in the clear of Pluto. But my question always is, when someone's, attributing something to an outer planet, is it really that outer planet that is doing the thing? What do you think, Vivi?
Well, knowing that that some of the themes in this person's life is they've gone through a pretty dramatic breakup with a long-term partner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's been a lot of changes to their finances, their career, right? This person's in a big adjustment period. And so, Pluto, I think maybe brought up some things perhaps, but I'm really thinking man, don't underestimate angular eclipses, right? Among other things. There's been a lot that's been happening in this chart. But my first thought is oh man, they were that really Taurus Scorpio eclipse really got into the minutia of whatever story was going on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. And that's a perfect example of that is when the eclipses started coming into Scorpio and Taurus, I'm the opposite of this, right? I'm Scorpio rising. And so my 7th house has Taurus in it, which is where the North Node was. And I remember our mentor, Larry, when all this started happening with Uranus being where it was. And actually, I'm going to pull up the transits again, because this person is dealing with Uranus as well. So Uranus is still not even a degree off of where it was in my chart. The first thing Larry said was, "Is everything okay with Dan?" Are you too good? And it's why? Because my 7th house was involved, because that long-term partnership is involved. And so what we're seeing here is this person has Uranus creeping up on their ascending degree.
Yep.
And I'm not ignoring that the ascendant and Chiron are exactly conjunct within 10 minutes of each other. I think that is probably notable for this person. Chiron is a dead comet, but we consider it like an asteroid. But that close, it spotted this person and was saying something. So,
it's interesting because this person is sort of a
wounded
they're
healer.
an artist, but they've always they're an artist, but they've had that sort of they're the natural therapist, where they've always sort of toyed with being a therapist, because I think that they do have that sort of healer qualities, right? Of being able to hold space for other people in a really beautiful way. Sort of a side note. Again, I know this person. You're right. Those angles. But also, as you were talking, I was thinking about Saturn just went through, thinking about Pluto, right? Saturn, something for everyone to think about, right? And Saturn kind of paved the way for this Pluto ingress. Yeah. So, this person's have had Saturn go through their 10th house, which was a chunk of time. That's what ended this past March. So, right, thinking about this person's gone through some really big, the sort of cardinal cross of change already, of who am I with? Where do I come from? Right? These are all big, huge topics brought forth by planets that are not Pluto.
Yeah. And as early as 2020, they would have been reassessing their whole sort of life direction, which, hopefully turned out well. I mean, we think about Saturn transiting this angle for them, the MC being at 1 degree. So 2020, early 2021, they would have felt that 1st degree. But it was when Saturn got around to it, trine their Saturn. So it is hopefully productive and supportive decisions that they've been able to make. Yeah. And now Saturn is in Pisces. So the tension of that hopefully has released a little bit, but there's other things at play for them to focus on now. So
oh, absolutely. But I hope we've sort of very quickly showcased that, Pluto square is a thing, but it is not the thing that I would focus on or make the center of my attention. There's so much more activity.
Yeah, especially with things beyond Saturn. The whole generation is feeling those at the same time. So this person was going through a Pluto square, but so was literally everybody born in the generation, really, or at least the later Gen X era. So that's something to also keep in mind when you're dealing with the outer planets. You're definitely not alone in what you're experiencing, especially if it's outer planet to outer planet. If Pluto. Go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say that if Pluto were dealing with something more natal, I'd be looking at that. But
I was just ouch, because I think year-wise, I'm technically I'm the same age as this person, and we're technically geriatric millennials, I think is the term. But if you go through astrology generations, I just became Gen X, which
Yeah.
just hurts.
Well, and normally I'd be like, I would assume geriatric millennial is when Pluto was in Scorpio and then dipped back. But 25 degrees is not enough for Pluto to cover. So I tried, but I didn't make it. I'm sorry. And I'm the worst. I'm a solid millennial. So my bad.
No, it's facts. This is why astrological generations make more sense, but also
Woof. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, that just reminded me that my generation's coming up on their Pluto square. So that'll be fun to watch, watch all the millennials go through the oh my God moment. Quite literally with, Aquarius being very much challenging gods in a lot of it's like Valens would say that Aquarius placements hate their own gods. So well, we'll find out. We'll see what happens. I think religion will go through a lot of change in the next 20 years for sure.
like, how much money would you give to just have like Valens at your dinner party?
Oh, I will tell you, Vivi, I attempt to channel Valens quite often. Not the most open energy I've worked with, for sure. But also like when I'm reading it, I can feel it. And I think Valens would be very chatty at a table. But I think that we would all have a lot of discord at a table with Valens, just as much as we would be in awe.
So good.
Yeah.
I digress.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I've
Moving
been
on to
reading a lot of like the ancient dudes talking about astrology lately, and it's like, all right, cool. Yeah, so that's the Pluto thing. I think we can say that we've covered that pretty well. The one that I think has a lot of testimony to it in the chart is this first question about what should I do about making money and being creative right now?
Yep.
My first instinct on that, when they said making money and being creative, was, well, who's the Lord of the second and the fifth? And it happens to be Mercury in both cases for this person. So the fact that they tied those together was really interesting to me. Like they go hand in hand for this person because Mercury governs the two of them. Did you have any other initial thoughts?
Well, again, it's hard. I know this person, and which is good because I can say yes, absolutely spot on. And KristaLyn doesn't know this, which is why this is a really fun chart to read. And I just think about how, in some ways, this person isn't very mercurial. They're an artist. They're a visual artist. They do a lot of ceramics work, among other things. Fashion feels like it feels very like Virgo Taurus, right? The kind of like work that they do.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that this person, interestingly enough, thinking about, you'll talk about this, that Jupiter in the first being opposed to Jupiter in the seventh. This is a person, I think, in some ways, who suppressed their own artistic creativity to be in partnership with someone else. And they're at a point in life where they're just like really coming out to reclaim, like, how do I move forward and make money using, my, graduate art degree, right? Mm-hmm. So this is someone who's has devoted lots of their life to being creative, but hasn't necessarily focused their energies on it in a financial way that they want to do now.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool too, because hopefully this year then, since their last birthday, which just really briefly was September 9th.
Yep.
Since September, hopefully this person has had a little bit more opportunity to focus on that, because one of the things that's interesting is by perfection, their sixth house is the perfected house from the ascendant. And that really is bringing Mercury into a little bit more of a focus because it's activated there. And also this exalted Saturn is there. I'm not too concerned about Pluto because, again, not one of the planets that can see us back. But these two, Saturn being in a good condition there is pretty cool. But just focusing on getting their affairs together, which is something I know we're going to talk about even more. But Mercury sort of saying, hey, by the way, this is who I am. Let's remember what we do. And I'm really loving that for this person in this context.
Yeah. And I know that for them, like that September was a big deal because that's when it's sort of a big change in their personal timeline. So seeing that shift to like the focus on, we could say autonomy, their own work, really checks this chart. And is a way, I think sometimes the thing I was landing on is that like also sometimes sixth house perfection years can be tricky and something that we have a lot of fear around, but they can also be really beautiful times for rebuilding ourselves slowly. Like, what are my new routines? How am I taking care of myself? How am I organizing my sort of physical problems in the world?
Yep. Yeah, you go after this fifth house of a lot of expression and passion and a lot of potential creativity and things into the, well, now that I've expressed myself, what does that look like in daily life so that I can interact with others with it when I get to the seventh house? So I really think that checks out. That's a really great interpretation.
It's interesting to think too that this person has that mutual reception between the fifth and the sixth, which makes the whole conversation a little more harmonious.
Yeah. I was actually listening to a lecture by Ben Dykes recently about the conditions of each revolution. So again, the new year zodiacally.
Yeah.
And he actually was asked about mutual reception. And he said, if they don't have an aspect, it doesn't count. And it's funny, like normally I'm like, oh, rules, cool. I like rules, Saturn and Capricorn. I can follow them. But recently I've been like, I know rules. I've been playing with them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that what you're saying is what I agree with in practice. But the reason for this, because I love the work that Ben Dykes does and will always appreciate the translations we have, and the footnotes he does are amazing. But I wonder about this one, because if we're talking about planets not really interacting with each other, if they don't have an aspect, one of the things I'm curious about right now is Antisha and Contra Antisha. Those are not aspects, but the planets are yielding and receiving each other at the same time. So I'm wondering, can we say something similar when they're in each other's signs in that way?
Isn't it technically, and I don't know where this term comes from because my brain, isn't it, I'm mad, it's not mutual reception. Technically, isn't it called a generosity where they share, isn't that what a generosity is, where they share signs, but they can't see each other?
That might be. I'd have to go double check, because in my brain, the generosity is when one planet is in another's exaltation or something like that. But the other one's not. So it's like I'm aspecting you and you get the extra generosity. But again, I can't say for sure. I don't have I'm not confident in that. I'd have to look it up.
There might be a word for that though. So we were unsure. I feel like whatever's happening there, you're right, technically not a mutual reception. I do think there is definitely a conversation that I would say is helping them out, because like they're in each other's homes.
Yeah. And I do remember reading in Valens when planets are exchanging each other's signs, which is what this is a mutual reception. And I don't remember seeing in Demetra George's book on ancient astrology or in Valens anything that says there must be an aspect. But I also don't know how understood that was from the beginning. Like, is that a foundational thing that planets are only working together when they are talking to each other, aspectos? But at the same time, again, we have that Antisha and Contra Antisha thing. So I'm like, there's room for this, but I don't know what I don't know yet. So I have to do more research.
At any rate, in this chart, it's interesting thinking about continuation of themes going from that fifth house to the sixth house. It almost feels like the fifth house, that Sun, Venus there, you get this sort of like big gesture of what it is. And now the sixth house is like, again, with that focus on Mercury of like, okay, how do we actually put this together? How do we, manage the details?
Yeah. And, if this is a good point for it, I do have that quote that I found in Maternus. Maternus does a lot about like moon placements and planetary combinations and stuff like that. That specifically talks about the moon in the second being the house of finances and material possessions and livelihood. So I did look that up. If you feel like now's a good time to share the quote.
I love that. Yes.
So this is a little bit about the natal promise of the moon being in the second and what this person with that placement can sort of expect and hope for. It's from Methesis, book 3, chapter 9. And so the quote goes, "The moon posited in the second house from the ascendant," so in the second house, in a nocturnal nativity, and we do have a nocturnal nativity because the sun is below the horizon, "will make famous persons involved in notable actions, but luxurious and devoted to delightful joys of pleasure, and those on whom, with the passage of time, a greater amount of wealth will be conferred." So Maternus is saying that this person is going to do really noticeable things, but it's going to be a compound effect. right? Like we're going to gain this wealth over time. That's not taking into account that we're in Gemini. And it's not taking into account that the dispositor of the moon, or the ruler of Gemini, is actually forming this lovely trine. The moon is actually, the next application will be to Mercury. And Maternus did have something to say about that as well, which is slightly cautionary. So I do have that quote if we wanted to look at it.
Okay, now I feel like now I have to share the quote.
Yeah. So I was hoping you'd say that, but I like to just the waters. So one of the things we're looking at here is that the moon is waning. The sun is in Virgo, the moon is in Gemini, heading towards Virgo. So we have a waning moon happening here. It's in a nocturnal chart. And the next application in the chart will be the moon to Mercury. So what Maternus says, and it's going to sound dire because Maternus was writing in the fall of Rome. So I'm guessing that they were very pessimistic, just, as a culture, but also it's Maternus. We've seen how he treats Venus. So I'm going to rehash it when I'm done reading it to bring it up to speed for our modern times. Okay, but if the waning moon moves towards Mercury, it will make malign, malicious, wicked persons unstable in their desires, wavering in error, and those who always leave all their counsels hanging because of manifold erratic doubt, and who reverse their own actions with constant changes, and who deny things that have been credited to them, or who desire to make secret writings public, and those who give out counsels entrusted to themselves with public denunciations, impostors always deceiving because of malicious desire, or those who unite their conscience with housebreakers and or thieves. They will, of course, be weak in body, listless, deformed, and those whom an acquired illness disables with malicious humors. So, sounds rough, right? But let's pull this apart. So what this is really saying is this person is applying to Mercury, right? Mercury is changeable by nature, and Mercury is often associated with thieves. And I think that Maternus really leaned heavily on that theme in this one. But what we can see is, if we're supposed to put this in a what does that mean today thing, it's this person has a tendency to take bad advice, or has a tendency to place their trust in people who don't necessarily deserve it. It's very much the Pinocchio trusting the fox guy in Pinocchio, like, you have a lot of good talent, and then you just trusted the wrong person to help you with it.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things that stuck out. There was something about not taking credit. What was that line? It was a small piece there, but that really hit with me, knowing this person. What is it?
Hang on a second. Reverse their own actions with constant changes, who deny things that have been credited to them. So they'll do something, and then they kind of, it's what is that called? Self-inflicted situations. But when you kind of self-fulfilling prophecy kind of things, there's a different word for that. But self-deprecation is another one.
Yes, to deny things that have been credited to them. And I think that one of the things this person's struggling with right now, among their sort of creativity, is like owning it, really, like not like, I think coming back to that sort of partnership piece, right, is like really wanting, you see that like Jupiter in the 7th, right, natally, like really wanting. Sometimes I think this is more just looking at charts, anecdotal, but sometimes with Jupiter in the 7th, there can be a tendency to almost like put your partner up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And I think like seeing this and knowing that this person in some ways has like really done that at the expense of themselves. And I think what's happening now with their creativity, it's not even just like, how do I make money? But I think this person's like struggling with like, how do I own my creativity? How do I come up, like, there's also in this person's life, there themes of like autonomy, of wanting to like own their work. And so thinking about that cautionary tale is actually something for this person to work with. Do I tend to take bad advice? Do I often not credit myself? And so I think that despite Maternus sounding terrifying, this is actually a really powerful piece for this person to meditate on.
Yeah. Well, and I can see that in the chart in a couple ways too. If we even look at Venus, she's in her joy. She loves being in the 5th house, but she is in Virgo. And so the 5th house does creativity. It also does romance. So again, the creative block might be there if there's a wound from the recent romance where someone wasn't appreciating. And again, she's in her fall. So Venus has this tendency to sort of give her love away when it's not as appreciated. When you think about kind of like overdoing it in that sense. So, finding romance, maybe not necessarily a problem, but being appreciated and equal in the romance might be something that is room for growth and a development point. And then we can't ignore that Mars is almost on the descendant. The descendant moves faster than Mars. So fortunately, it is like separating from Mars a little bit, but it's still very close. And so Mars is the out of sect malefic here. The sun is down. Mars is the out of sect malefic of the night of the daytime, actually. So Mars is not the out of sect malefic. My bad. Mars is not the out of sect malefic. Saturn is, and Saturn's quite dignified. Mars is also dignified by domicile, but there's this competition that might be happening there.
Mars, it's still Mars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So out of sect, intersect, right? There's competition's a good word thinking about, and also when you're saying the Venus thing, I'm thinking about that again. I'll call it a generosity term, is up for debate. Well, whatever is happening between that's yoking the 5th house and the 6th house together, right? It's like maybe be careful about making your lovers, your 6th house problem.
Yeah, don't make your spouse or your significant other your manager of your creative art.
Yeah, or get into a really codependent working situation with them. It might not be the best thing for you.
Yeah, because you might find yourself in a conflict of interests. Yeah. So, but I also love what you said about the Jupiter in the 7th, putting pedestals on there.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about stuff like that a lot lately, and that really resonates with that point as well.
And then thinking about going back to like what's happening, like transiting Jupiter in the 1st, it's like having to like really face that down of like, okay, what have I made that person into, but also who am I?
Yeah. Yeah. And I also really love, this person was saying, what do I do about making money? And one of the things you and I talked about before jumping on this live, I think is really helpful for more than one of their questions. Jupiter is currently in Taurus, so they're figuring themselves out right now, which is really cool, and they should do that. But also later this year, if we look at the sign transits, on May 25th, Jupiter is going to move into Gemini, and Gemini happens to be this person's 2nd house. And so we see Jupiter, abundance, moving into the 2nd house, bringing in potentially an abundance of resources, an abundance of support for their livelihood, if nothing else. And I think that that's really an interesting thing. When you and I looked at other timing situations, though, and I'll let you cover those in specificity, it did seem like this is a good time to also be saving those resources rather than spending them more immediately.
Absolutely. I want to point out too, this person's in a breakup of sorts where there is a division of assets happening. And so it's interesting to think around the time Jupiter moves into that 2nd house, which bodes well for them, we should hope. Uranus is going to be making that opposition with Mars in the 7th. So it does feel like there is maybe some movement with whatever's happening in that division of assets.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think Jupiter definitely says you get the boon. Hopefully that's how it plays out as well.
We will keep all of us, I'll keep everyone posted.
Yeah.
Did you want to go into the larger timing techniques?
Yeah. So I looked at a couple. I know you really looked at a couple too, especially some of the zodiacal releasing stuff. There's changes coming in this year and next year for this person, just sort of in their sort of life pace. So I think that's really helpful to kind of dive into.
Should you start? Do you want me to start?
Well, we only have a couple minutes, so let's go ahead and start with the zodiacal releasing, because I think that's where the most change comes, and then I'll drop in with a little bit about the secondary progressions.
Perfect. So I'll just pop in real quick, summarize this. So essentially on a level, they are about in January of 2025, so a year from now, they are going to move into a level 1 Sagittarius period. I'm like pointing at my chart, like you can see. Essentially, that is angular from fortune, angular from their sun, angular from that moon, which we could interesting thinking about some of those like nighttime riches. And so to me, it feels like this is a period. They haven't been in an angular period like this since they were 19, right? So think about like maybe someone who feels like they were doing really well in high school. And so to me, it's like thinking about knowing that right now they're in this sort of like 6th house perfection year. Some of the transits are happening. It feels like the general idea. Also, Pluto moving into Aquarius feels really big to do with this as well, right? Like Pluto in the 10th house in the midheaven. It feels like the next year is really about getting the plans together, as you said, saving money, organizing things, because it feels like once we move into that new level 1, there's going to be a lot of action, and this person is going to enter a peak period, which is something I think that they can right now really resource themselves with, both, spiritually, financially, energetically, to prepare for this really much more active period in life.
Yeah. And I do like that you brought Pluto into it, because again, Pluto is not going to hit the MC and then just move on. Pluto is going to hit the MC and back up and then come for it one more time. So this is an extra prolonged experience, right?
Yeah.
We're going to be spending this year and next year with Pluto helping to, again, evolve this person's sense of direction in life.
Yeah.
And that may come with career as well. So I also do like that, Mercury is in a whole sign trine to the midheaven and rules their creativity. So that might also help them, make their creativity part of their direction and their career. That would be nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I feel like overall, this just feels like, to this person, I'd be like, you're going through a lot of different changes. Things are, but this feels very exciting overall to me.
Yeah. It feels like you've almost made it. Now, like the hard part is over. Now's the time where you gather resources and rest. Bide your energy, bide your time, bide your resources, because the peak is coming and you can look forward to it, which I think is really helpful.
I would also add to that too, like thinking about 6th house is sometimes like knowing that this person's life is completely upended. Like this is a good time to get your routines together. Like, how do I sleep? How do I wake up? Like, what do I do when I first wake up? Right. Like all of those just sort of minutia things that when periods of busyness, right, are going to be the things that really ground you and help you stabilize the more active periods of life that are coming down the chute in like a year or so.
And how are you maintaining your health for longevity at this point too? Saturn is in this place exalted, saying like, if you haven't been considering, one of my themes for 2024, just to jump on the cheesy train of making 4 a part of the thing, is thinking forward. And so I'm like getting on a dental care routine that's going to be long-term, a skincare routine that's going to be long-term. I'm thinking about, what is 10 years from now me going to wish I did now? And I think that this person could also be thinking about that too, because by the time 2025 rolls around, again, we're seeing their Saturn opposition starting to kick in very slowly. So that's going to be something that they'll be thinking about, and it will be something that they'll have prepared for, because they did have this foresight, which might be helpful.
Oh, I love it. And I know we have to go, but do you want to?
Yeah, I can do the secondary progress really quickly. So if we look at secondary progressions, I bring this up because I'm going to put it on two. So this is the chart itself, but we're going to put it on the natal chart like we've been doing the rest of this time. And I really want to look at the moon by secondary progression. And it doesn't have any specific aspect, but I am just pointing it out so we can see it better. If we look at where the moon is in relation to the sun, it is increasing in light, and it's coming from a new moon in that 6th house again. So we're increasing in activity. So again, over the next 10 to 15 years-ish, more like 10 years probably, we're going towards another full moon time. So energy and activity in this person's life is only growing. They are coming out of this period of rumination, of healing, of other things, and starting something new with a crescent moon phase in their life. And it is in that Sagittarius again. So we're seeing Sagittarius pop up a couple times here, right?
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to point that out. And then there was one other thing that I thought was pretty interesting, is that Venus, probably in the next 2 years again, is going to, now that she is domiciled, she didn't start out there. Remember, she was in fall. Now she's domiciled by progression, and she is she's about to conjoin with that exalted Saturn. So we have Venus and domicile, exalted Saturn coming together, really giving support to what Venus is up to in the chart. And Saturn saying, hey, I'm going to be here for you to lean on, rather than something that bulldozes you, which is hopefully pretty nice. I'm looking forward to that for this person. I know some people are going to point out that Saturn and Pluto are close. Progressions move even slower than outer planets. That's long off. We don't have to worry about it. But this will be over the next 2 years or so, likely. If I wanted to, I could pop down here, go into years, and you'll see that she doesn't move too far. So we get 2529 to 2536 by next year. That is when I would say in 2025, we're
Yeah.
starting to think about how this is going to affect this person in a progression, since it's not talking about a progressed planet to the natal planet or from the outer chart to the inner chart, it's the outer chart. So a lot of people will say like, this is when sort of acts of God happen, where you just know you're doing something different. Something different just happens. It's not like this, I think I might do this, which would happen with a progressed planet in the outer here, interacting with an inner planet here from the natal. We're getting I have to do this and I just know it. So this sense of certainty and direction is on its way as early as a year from now. And probably—
Which I love it. Sorry, I was thinking about too, like Pluto can be like riches, right? Like think there's something really beautiful profound about something like coming up to the surface that doesn't necessarily have to be like bad, but also thinking of how that checks out with this like level 1 switchover in Sagittarius. So it feels like, again, more testimony that maybe the next year is a preparatory for something really big that's going to happen.
Yeah. So that's what I kind of wanted to point out, that we are preparing for some movement and some alignment, I think is a really good way of saying it. Like alignment, whether you're looking for it or not. So you might as well prepare for it.
Love it. And I know you have to go. So should we stop sharing and then we do our little wrap up, and I'm going to mirror my screen. It drives me nuts. Okay.
All right. So Vivi, what have you got going on these days?
Well, talk as always. So I'm encouraging everyone, Art of the Zodiac on Substack, in all the places. I have some really great interviews that are about to come out. I'm stoked about that. I'm doing a pop-up in New York next week. So by the time this will be out, it'll probably be done, but who knows? And my books are open for readings. That's about it. My books are open. I'm interviewing people. Follow me, Art of the Zodiac, in all the places.
Awesome. Yeah. So I've got the Sacred Spaces gathering coming up the weekend of the 28th here in Richmond. There are still tickets available for that. I know it's really close, but if you're like, I really feel like doing something spiritual that's going to be responsible and ethical, that's an option. sacredspacesgathering.com has all the information there. I'm so excited. It's shaping up to be pretty awesome. And then I'm probably going back to school for a master's in divinity, starting next month, if the application process goes smoothly, which it so far is going pretty smoothly. So my bookings are going to more of my my long-term clients, which I'm still taking. So my individual bookings are probably going to have to be less available. I'm trying to make them still available, but they're going to be a little bit less slots available, just so I can make sure I'm studying. But I do still work with clients long-term, and you can check that out on my website at modernschoolofancientwisdom.com.
Love it. And then of course, we should say, if you have an astrology question, you've made it this far in the podcast, YouTube video, whatever, go to askmeastros.com, submit your question for a chance to have us answer it. And there is a code, which we could just say it at this point, the discount code for, what is the discount code, KristaLyn?
It's usually, what is this now? It's going to be Pisces AMA.
Pisces AMA. And then you can use that if you watched this far to get a discount on readings with either of us. And if we select your question, you get a reading with each of us. So the person whose question we answered today will get a reading to follow up with. So to integrate, which I think is really important, right? We said a lot of stuff and they will have a chance to integrate with each of us.
Yes. And I think that's really cool too, because you get to see how two different astrologers go for it, which is really interesting because we're all different. So I like it. I like what we do here.